Good morning, one and all. Today, IQSC Lyra Academy is conducting a workshop on national education policy. We have so many questions on this. All the questions Madam will be clearing to us. Today, we have our admissed Dr. Leena Wadia, is a senior fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, Mumbai, one of the India's premier independent, non-partisan public policy think tanks. Madam received her PhD in physics from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. Her thesis work and subsequent postdoctoral research at ETH Zurich was in the area of high-performing computing. She has been a researcher at several places in India and abroad, including NCST, Mumbai, now it is called as CDAC, EPF, Lausanne, and Kern in Switzerland, and IIT Bombay. She also served as Senior Vice President and CTO at Netcore Solutions Private Limited, a startup company in the area of mobile value-added services. Since moving to ORF in 2010, Wadia has been engaged in research and public advocacy in the areas of education, renewable energy, public health, and sustainable agriculture. The primary focus of her work has been on the higher education in India, and she has produced several in-depth research reports advocating reforms in science education, engineering education, medical education, and vocational education. She also played a key role in the preparation of Karnataka State Education Policy in 2015. Since August 2017, she has been supporting the Dr. Kasturi Rangan Committee to prepare India's draft National Education Policy, first as a member of research team and then as a member of drafting committee. The draft version of the policy was submitted to government on 30th May 2019. The policy, which is coming up after a gap of 30 years, is now implemented. And respected audience, this page, I took it from a website called as nobelprize.org. Thank you very much, madam, for obliging our request and chairing this session to clear our doubts regarding the NEP, whatever we have. We are proud to invite you to Loyola Academy. Loyola Academy is run by Jesuits, was established in the year 1978 with the efforts of tireless efforts committed by the Jesuit people. We run all professional courses like BSc Chemical Technology, BSc Agricultural Science and Rural Development, BCom Computers, BCom Analytics, BA Mass Communication. We have MSc Organic Chemistry, MCA, MBA, and MSc Food Technology and Management. And we, in the third cycle, we got A grade, and our college is also listed in NIRF rankings. So with this note, I request you, madam, to give us a preface regarding the NEP. After that, immediately we'll start our question hour. Thank you, madam. It's over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to speak to Loyola Academy in Secunderabad. I studied 4 years of my secondary school in St. Anne's High School in Secunderabad. And then I did my BSc and MSc in Hyderabad, St. Francis College in Begumpet and Central University, Hyderabad. So, that area is very, very close to me because they supported my formative years. So it's a pleasure to be here. What I would like to do is to start sharing screen. Can someone allow me to share screen? So what I will do while the
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
permission. Yeah, I'll try again in a minute.
Yes.
So what I wanted to do was to have it more interactive. And so I said I will do maybe a 15-20 minute presentation where I will share the philosophy and the principle, the spirit of the policy, and then we can discuss, because the specifics, the draft policy has been out since May 2019, and the government's version of the NEP has been out since July 2020. So it's many months, and I'm sure that most of you have seen it. If you have not seen it, please make sure you see it, because it's a very, very important document that will influence all our lives for the next 20 years. So it's necessary to look at it and study it and understand it, because faculty and managements of institutions are the key implementers of the policy. And so, it's important that all of them, everyone is familiar, all of us, each and every one of us are familiar with the policy. So I will just share, like I said, the spirit of the policy as soon as I'm able to share my presentation. Let me try again once more. No, it's still disabled.
We can show, madam.
Can I try now?
Yeah, you have at the bottom share screen. No, you can share it.
No, I'm trying that. It is saying host has disabled participant share screen sharing. When I click share screen, that is the message I'm getting. So I need somebody in IT to actually, or whoever's running the Zoom session, to enable my, for me. Have you all discussed the policy in the college before?
Yes, madam.
Okay. No, it's still saying disabled. Is someone trying to enable it, please?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Madam, I think if you want to host, you have to create the meeting, madam. So it's not
No. I have shared slides on many presentations where I didn't create the meeting. After the NEP has released, I have done more than 40 presentations. So mostly on Zoom. I just need permission. So they have to, whoever disabled presentation will have to enable, actually. Participant present, host disabled participant screen sharing.
My budget.
Do you want me to log out and log back in, or what?
just log out. Madam, just log out, madam, once.
Okay. No, it's still saying host disabled screen sharing. What shall we do?
1 second.
See, host is this ITC computer. She is this one. How? I mean, I'm not the host. I'm participant.
Now I'm able to. Now I'm able to share screen.
Okay, okay. No.
Can you see it?
Okay, fine.
Can you see my screen?
Here the share screen is
Yes,
yes,
ma'am.
no. Yes, okay, fine. It's done.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, ma'am. We are
madam.
able.
Yes,
Okay. Okay, great, great, great.
yes, madam.
So let's begin because we've lost some time. So let's just begin quickly. One second. Yeah, all right. So what I want to say is that, you know, the NEP is actually a transformational policy. It is not trying to make incremental changes. It is trying to completely overhaul the education system. And those of you who have read it will have realized it. But what is the challenge with that? The challenge is that the destination where we want to go, the vision for the new education system in the country is very clearly specified, but the pathways to reach there are not. So what that means is that how do we get from where we are today to where we want to be in 10 years is for individual institutions, for the leadership of higher education institutions and faculty members to find their own pathways. So this will call for a mindset change because we have to do things in new ways. And we need to, for this, we need to imbibe the spirit of the policy. And this is why Dr. Kasturi Rangan and all of us, we are going around the country, of course, virtually now, but we are trying to share. I'm sorry, can everyone mute their mics, please? You know, we need a mindset change because people have to do things in new ways. So this is why we are all going around sharing the spirit of the policy, because this is not a set of instructions for people to implement. This is a vision, a dream, if you want to call it, and we need to all work together to achieve the dream. But fortunately, the NEP provides a compass, and the compass is plain and simple. It is what is best for students. So you have to ask ourselves, what is the best thing to do? How do we train our students for the future, and do accordingly? And of course, two things that are very, very important, which we have to do for our students, is to help them acquire 21st century skills. I'll come to that in a minute. And also teach them how to learn so that they become lifelong learners. We stop giving them information and testing them, their ability to retain information. We teach them how to learn. And so a lot is expected from faculty members and managements. So, but what I'm excited about is Loyola Academy is an autonomous institution. So it can be among the leaders because it already has much of the freedoms that are needed in order to do what is expected from the policy, okay? So in 2000, the World Bank actually, before that in 1998 or 99, the World Bank set up a task force on higher education to think about what should be the future of education for developing countries. And so the title of the report is called Higher Education in Developing Countries, Peril or Promise. And the member from India was none other than Dr. Manmohan Singh. Okay, and they came up with an amazing document. I think it is worth reading even today because it's still relevant. And so this is a crowded slide. I just copy pasted some pieces of text because it is so relevant to today, and 20 years later, it's relevant to today and the goals of the national education policy. What it says, and I'll read out a few of them, is participation in the knowledge economy requires a new set of human skills. People need to have higher qualifications and to be capable of greater intellectual independence. They must be flexible and be able to continue learning well beyond the traditional age of schooling. Without improved human capital, countries will inevitably fall behind and experience intellectual and economic marginalization and isolation. The result will be continuing, if not rising, poverty. And this is very, very true of India. We need to get out we need to lift millions out of poverty, and education is a very definite pathway. And it says also that lack of a well-qualified and motivated faculty and insufficient autonomy to institutions and their faculty are a problem. You see, that needs to change. Key characteristics of higher education that need to change. Faculty must be paid well, be empowered to design and deliver their own curriculum, and assess their own students. This is one of the main reasons why in India today we have a problem with education, because we have centralized exams and students are studying to the exams and teachers are teaching to the exams. And last but not least, I want to just read you the last line. Because the economy will need both generalists and specialists. So, but what the last line says is that all this will help to ensure that developing countries have a chance to catch up and get ahead, because the developed countries are constantly improving among themselves and moving forward. So we are trying to catch up with developed countries, but developed countries, because they already are at a higher level, are able to move faster and improve their education constantly. Every country in the world is improving their education from wherever it is. So if we want to catch up, we need to move much faster. And that's the philosophy of the NEP. So the vision statement of the NEP, you must have seen it. It says the purpose of education system is to develop good human beings capable of rational thought and action, possessing compassion and empathy, courage and resilience, scientific temper and creative imagination, with sound ethical moorings and values. So there is as much emphasis on knowledge and ability to do things as values. It aims at producing engaged, productive and contributing citizens for building an equitable, inclusive and plural society as envisaged by our constitution. So basically the policy goes on to say somewhere else that, you know, the emphasis is on the development of the creative potential of each individual. It's based on the principle that education must develop not only cognitive abilities, capacities, but the foundational capacities of literacy and numeracy, and higher order cognitive capacities such as critical thinking and problem solving, and also social, ethical and emotional capacities and dispositions. So based on all this, the approach of the policy, this is my one slide summary of the NEP. What it does is it's trying to create a flexible yet integrated education system. It starts with considerable regulatory reform, which will actually start rolling out in the next month onwards, from April onwards, because the Prime Minister has signaled that he wants NEP to be implemented very fast. So regulation will change, a lot more autonomy will come to higher education institutions, and the basis of the autonomy will be accreditation outcomes. Accreditation will be reformed and accreditation will become mandatory, and every institution will have to be accredited at least once in 5 years. For Loyola Academy, that's not a problem. You've already been through 3 cycles of accreditation, but there are hundreds and thousands of institutions out there that are not accredited. So the policy tries to phase out affiliation and wants to consolidate higher education. We want good institutions like Loyola Academy to increase their enrollment, to enroll. Only 4% of Indian higher education institutions have more than 3,000 students. We want that number to grow much larger, and we want small institutions. 64% of our institutions have less than 500 students. That's a very bad environment for students to study, because they can't learn from each other. So we want some of those to be shut down, especially the ones that enroll less than 100 students. So there is a consolidation. There is a broad sort of emphasis on liberal education, which means you not only get knowledge, but you learn skills, you learn attitudes, and so on. So it tries to integrate vocational and professional education. And from what was said at the beginning, I can see that your college is already doing that, because you're doing, basic education in chemistry and so on, but you're also doing food technology. So that's the right way to go. We need you to design more better and stronger courses. And we have made, in order to encourage students to sort of explore both their left brain and right brain components, to study mathematics with music, or physics with languages, we have opened up a 4-year undergraduate program. And then there is going to be a lot of research money. I'm sure you did not miss it, that in the budget, Finance Minister announced a budget of 50,000 crores over 5 years for the National Research Foundation, which will come up. So faculty and students will be able to conduct meaningful research. And for doing this, they will get help from experienced researchers in their cities, in their towns. For example, Hyderabad has so many high-end research institutions. The faculty from there can collaborate with you to do research. And then, of course, the policy has placed a lot of emphasis on equity. So there are 2 chapters on equity, one for school education and one for higher education. We need to uplift all our society members, especially women. I'll show you some numbers later. And of course, one of the most important things that the policy has done is to introduce this academic bank of credits, which basically means that, you know, any course that you have done, you will accumulate the credits for it over a period of time. You can start studying. If you are forced to exit because you got married or you got your parents got transferred or something like that, you will be able to come back into the system whenever you're ready and accumulate your credits and graduate. And this academic bank of credits will also help with something very, very important, which is it will enable partnerships within the university system. Colleges can collaborate with each other and say that, you know, your neighboring college can say that Loyola Academy's chemistry course is excellent. So if somebody does a course there, we'll give you credits for it, and you can take credits from some other place and so on. So of course, all this depends on whether it is all doable, because students cannot be expected to travel very far if you want to take the courses physically. And, you know, first generation students don't really want to take online courses. So, but the policy has enabled it. And, you know, you can even share courses between public and private sector. So for example, you have an organization like UpGrad, which is offering high-end courses in AI and machine learning, which is being given credits at high-end institutions like IIT Madras and IIIT Bangalore and so on. So the future of education will be more fluid. Institutions will collaborate with each other to educate a child. So why are we doing all this? We are doing all this because I don't know, sometimes we don't notice it, but, you know, the world around us has changed a lot from our parents' generation and even from our generation. That, you know, the economy is growing. Even at its best growing time, it was not generating jobs, because companies are buying more machinery. So machinery is becoming more sophisticated, and they're buying machinery to do things that people would normally have done, which means there are fewer jobs. And then there is growing inequality. Wealth is, you know, sort of the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, which is a very, very big social problem. I don't have to emphasize that too much. There is also a lot of growing divisions in society. There's a loss of scientific temper. There is, you know, the newspapers are full of it. I don't have to go into that. Similarly, India is extremely vulnerable to climate change. And so, you know, we are seeing heavy rains and floods and droughts. There's no drinking water. And, you know, we recently saw what happened in Uttarakhand. So these are all challenges that young people will need their education to help them deal with. So, you know, the most important things to do is to have give students an overall development, you know, enabling them to become informed and lifelong learners, change social inequalities, and gain control over their lives. So it turns out that in 1996, there was a famous UNESCO report called Learning the Treasure Within, which talked about the 4 pillars of education, which is learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, which is become self-aware, and learning to live together. And these require certain characteristics, like they need empathy, they need resilience. Students should be able to fail and get up and then continue doing. They need communication skills, they need negotiation skills, they need decision-making skills. So this kind of framework, UNICEF has created a comprehensive life skills framework for India. There's another way of putting it. This is in 2015, there was another World Economic Forum document which put very clearly what do we mean by 21st century skills. It means that, you know, you don't just have literacy and numeracy, but you have to have scientific literacy, ICT literacy, financial literacy, cultural and civic literacy. You need to have a lot of competencies, which is critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, communication, and collaboration. And you also need to have strength of character, which means you need to have curiosity, you need to have some initiative you cannot be too passive, you need persistence and grit, you need adaptability and leadership, and so on. These are all called soft skills, but the place to learn them is in school. And there is the World Economic Forum report also talks about how to teach it. I won't go into it. It is well known now that soft skills can be taught. And one of the things that we have done in the education policy is to emphasize vocational education and skill development a lot, and we have recommended that vocational education is integrated into schools and colleges, like you are doing. You are doing so many courses that are actually sort of directly tied to industry and employability, and that is a very good thing. And the word integration means that these students get some practical experience if they go out and be apprentices or interns in industry. They come back to class and the teachers and the other students discuss with this child what all they have learned, because in a workplace you don't only learn your job, you learn many other social things about how an organization is run, how teamwork happens, how you shadow senior people and you learn how they function. So there's a lot of unrecorded learning that happens in workplaces. So those things must be taken use of. I hope all your courses have apprenticeships and internships built into them, because they're absolutely critical. Recently, I was at an industry meet, and the people told us that it's it was a whole lot of Tata companies, and they said that it's so sad that students pass out of MSc and PhD and they're not able to write. They're not confident of speaking. They are shy of speaking among their colleagues and all, and they are also, and worse, they are not confident of writing. That's not okay. We have to give students opportunity to speak, to come up to the front of the class and speak. And we have to give them lots of opportunities to write. So the pedagogies have to change. All the lecture pedagogy has to be thrown out of the window or used very sparingly. And we have to have students take initiative and learn, and faculty will have to guide them as to how to learn. And of course, we have to prepare students for entrepreneurship and self-employment, because like I said, there are no jobs. So if you look at the profile of the Indian labor force, it's very interesting. When I was a young scientist, I never paid attention to these things, to the elements of economy. Where do people go and work? Which industries do they go to, or what kind of jobs do they have? But this one slide is worth looking at. What it says here is that the regular salaried wage employees are only 25% of our workforce, which is 450 million, and casual labor, which is, you work one day, you get paid for that day. And then if you don't get any work for 4 days, you don't get paid. That kind of casual labor is another nearly 25%. It's pretty shocking. And then people who are self-employed, who work for themselves with maybe one family member or one employee, these self-employed own account workers are the largest group, 34%. This is our MSMEs, small companies which are not able to grow or not wanting to grow, and we need to understand that. And of course, there are unpaid family workers who are, this is where most of the women are, because if you look at this circle, you will see that the female labor force participation is 26% only. Of the 450 million, the women are only 26%, which is a shockingly small number. Similarly, entrepreneurs, which are the employers, are only 2%. So entrepreneurship is actually not that common. Hopefully, it will pick up in the coming years. So what do we want faculty to do? We want faculty to actually focus on the knowledge, skills, and attitudes approach. That what do you know? is knowledge, what can you do is skills. So you focus on promoting ability of students to do things, and what are your attitudes and mindsets towards society, towards the burning problems in society, and so on. So you know, like I said, you have to innovate in teaching, you have to design high quality courses, you have to engage with industry to bring in funds through consulting and go on sabbaticals yourself, and find internships and apprenticeships for students. And we've discussed this, leverage research funds from NRF, and mentor other institutions if you can nearby. If there are weaker institutions, you mentor them. And you know, you change the internal evaluation system of faculty members so that you give credit to faculty members who perform service to students, who help them with their mental health, or to run clubs, or and so on, and who perform service to the institution and to society. This is very, very important, because unless you change the way faculty is evaluated, faculty will not be, they will risk too much if they actually take the initiative to put a lot of time on students. And a very good example of this is College of Engineering, Pune, which became autonomous, and they have come up with a completely internal evaluation system built on consensus, in which, you know, that college has 65 clubs, you know, everything from astronomy to rowing and, you know, all of that. And the faculty helps to run them so that students get more experience on many, you know, what do you call, non-classroom activities, and so on. So I think that it is very, very important that institutions invest in their faculty and engage them in transforming education. And I do believe that institutions that do not invest in their faculty will fall behind over the years. And faculty in turn must keep their focus on student learning and personality development, and help in their institutions by looking at consulting opportunities to raise money, for example, and to take up other activities that benefit community. I'll stop here. I think this is good enough. I think I'll stop here. There are some references. I can share the slides with you all later if you want it. Let me stop here and we can start the discussion. I've already spoken too much anyhow.
Shall we start, madam?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much, madam, for your kind enlightening us on the policy. And as an IQSC coordinator of your college, I would like to say two things. First thing is, as we all know, in 1968, the first education policy was launched in Parliament by Panditji.
Right.
And in 86, it was launched by Indira Gandhi. I'll tell you the thing which has happened in between 2 years, how our Jesuit management has thought. In the year 1976, we started our BSc Chemical Technology. 78, we started with BSc Chemical Technology. The vision of my management, where we have a blended learning of maths, physics, chemistry along with chemical technology to suit the local pharmaceutical needs. 1976, it started, madam.
Right.
So again, 92, they have second one. So in between, what has happened is we had a BSc Computer Science Engineering, BSc Computer Maintenance.
Right.
We have Electronics Technology, all courses. Nowhere in India we have.
Right.
So we have framed our, I'm giving the example of only sciences. We have same life sciences and arts also. So madam, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I think it is wonderful what you have done. When I heard the introduction, I realized this. You must go out and talk about what you have done. You must share your experience. You must encourage other colleges to start, because normal BA, BSc, BCom, which is only exam oriented, is not leading to any employability. 1 in 3 kids are getting employed. The remaining 2 are wasting their education. That's not how we want it. We need more organizations like you all to look at what is the industry around you and to teach courses that service those industries. Yeah.
And madam, one more thing I would like to say is what we have seen in the slides is we are already practicing. After the 4th semester, we send our students for project work.
Right.
They go for project work for 1 month. They come back. When they learn more than others, because they already seen what is practical.
Correct.
So this is in practice since years.
Right.
So that is about my vision of my Jesuit management.
Right.
But what has brought some doubts in my mind is when I read the draft, they said in one statement regarding UG education, after first year, if they drop out, they will give certificate. Second year, they will give PG certificate. Third year, they will give degree. Now, the point is, how can we expect to drop out from the first year after the education is completed? Is it not
No, sir. Yeah, no. So the idea is not to encourage dropout. The idea is to help people who are forced to drop out to be able to come back. That's all. So it is not, it is the normal thing is for students to start and complete their courses. What happens is that we are seeing one of the key focus of the NEP is to stem dropouts. We know that, you know, if 100 students start in first standard, in 11th standard, there are only 56 students. Okay, 44 students have dropped out. All right. And then if you get to higher education, only 26 students. Today, GER is 26%. But up to 2004, GER was less than 10%. So only 10 students get higher education. Okay. And even in those higher education, if a girl gets married or if a student's parents get transferred or they get sick or somebody dies and there's a financial problem, whatever 1 year, 1.5 years that they have studied, it gets wasted because there is no credit accumulation, there is no certification. So if the student has to come back to education, they have to start from the beginning again. We're trying to stem that waste. We want every student who wants to complete their education to benefit from what they have already studied. So it is a flexibility given for people who are under constraint to stop. It is not meant to be the norm. It is the exception.
Madam, regarding the research funding also, since last 2 to 3 years, there is a, there's a blockage is there. Will it be open shortly?
Yeah. So I said no. The finance minister had included the National Research Foundation in her budget in July of 2019, before the government's version of the NEP was out in public. Okay. And then after the government's version was out in public in July 2020, in February 2021, she has announced a budget of 50,000 crores for the National Research Foundation. And the idea is that anybody can get good ideas and therefore they must be funded to do research. So the research proposals will have to be very well written, clearly written, highly researched. And then if they are good, they will be funded to whatever extent they need. So it will be competitive, peer-reviewed funding, and the NRF will be set up hopefully starting April 1st. We'll see. Yeah, we'll hear about it soon. Yeah, there will be lots of funding. Yeah.
Thank you, madam. Madam, I am also from Pune University.
Okay. Nice.
Now I request my management members to ask some questions.
Very good morning to you, madam.
Good morning.
This is for the Dr. Joji.
Yeah.
From the Department of Biotechnology, madam.
Yes.
I was also a resource person for this NEP for many other colleges.
Okay, that's nice to know that. That's very nice to know that.
And also happy to hear that you are a student of St. Francis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Madam, a few questions, a couple of questions I would like to pose. Particularly, what exactly do you mean IDP, madam? Institutional Development Planning. Could you please say something about it, madam?
So the idea is that you want to simplify regulation. Okay, we don't want regulators to have too much control on institutions, right? So you want to simplify regulations. But if you, in India, the ethics are not uniformly good. Let's be very clear about that. So, but you want the institutions to commit to doing a few things like what is your fee policy, what is your admissions policy, what is your, apprenticeship related policy, anything that involves, opportunities for students and growth of the institution. We want you to put it out in the public domain so that parents and students know what to expect from that institutions when they join, because we know that there is a capture, right? You join an institution, you have to be there for 3 years. So if you realize that, of course we have simplified that, but you shouldn't be disappointed in what you thought you were getting and what you're actually getting. And on the part of the management, we want the management to say, this is what we are offering and this is what we are charging this much fees for, because the policy is also relaxing on fees, saying that private institutions can decide their own fees, which may take some time to come, because I think governments don't want to relax their control. But our thinking was that if you relax fees and you relax regulation, then there must be some contract between the institution and the consumers, that is the parents and the students, on what they are going to get in return for their fees. So that is the institutional development plan, actually.
Madam, another question. Now we have 3 types of colleges going to come through NEP, madam. One is autonomous degree granting colleges.
Yes.
The second one is teaching intensive universities. And
Yes.
the third one is research intensive universities, madam.
Yeah.
But majorly they are going to fund only, the research intensive universities. And the next institutes to get benefited is teaching intensive universities. How about funding for autonomous degree granting colleges, because research is not stressed for these colleges as such?
No. So that is the whole idea, that undergraduate university places, autonomous degree granting colleges, need not be compelled to do research. You do research if you have a faculty member who wants to do research. Then he or she can apply for research funding and get it. So there is no compulsion. So their focus is on high quality undergraduate education. There is no statement that says that research universities will be funded more or less than teaching universities, nothing like that. This statement, this type of institutions is basically our observation of what exists today. So we have research institutions like the CCMB, Center for Molecular Biology in Hyderabad, right? That's a research institution. At the time of independence, they made this decision to have research institutions and universities separate. So in research institutions, research happens, not enough teaching happens, no undergraduate teaching happens, little bit of PhD programs run. So we are saying we want to remove that boundary. So you are starting as a research institution, so you're doing a lot of research already. So naturally you will be categorized as a research university, but the NEP is encouraging them to start undergraduate teaching. And state universities have traditionally, Osmania University has been traditionally a big teaching university, and we're saying teaching and research go hand in hand, so you must do some research. So we are encouraging existing state universities to become research universities. So it is more a statement of where we are starting. At the moment we have research institutions, most of which are centrally funded and well funded, and then we have state universities, and then we have a lot of affiliated colleges and very few autonomous colleges. So we want to grow the body of autonomous colleges, because autonomous colleges by definitions have better managements and are doing better in doing education. So that's what it is. There's no discrimination based on category. It's from where we start.
Madam, one more question, madam. That is now, if you are affiliated college, you have to become either autonomous degree granting college in 10 years, or you need to join a clustered college. You can join a cluster
college and become a university. Yeah.
So what do they mean by clustering? What is the area they specify within a district or within a range of a city? What exactly do they mean, madam?
So I think that, practically, so let's be very clear about one thing. The pandemic has taught us the value of online education. we
Yes.
will continue to use online education a lot, but
Yes.
the future of education is still physical education. So, you know, if you can have a cluster, if there is a cluster within, it's easy to have a cluster in an urban area. Let me say that in cities, for example, like in Bombay, where our office is, HR College, Jai Hind College, Sydenham College, KC College, they are all within 10 minutes of walking distance from each other, and St. Xavier's College. Okay. So they can form a cluster if they want to and share courses. Then you only have to do some clever timetabling to say that all student movement related classes will be held on Wednesday afternoon. So, you know, Wednesday afternoon, you're either studying in some other college, everybody's studying in their, so that kind of thing. But otherwise, cluster cannot be that practical, except that because we have 40,000 colleges in our country, many are clustered around urban areas, and it's possible to have clusters. Also, there are clusters of same management colleges, like you know, the same management has multiple colleges in the city, so they can also form a cluster and share classes. And then they can say that, okay, there are 3 colleges in one region and 4th and 5th are far away. The 4th and 5th classes you can take online, and we will give you credit for it. So you are then doing a mix of physical classes and online classes. So there might be some of these. Again, all these flexibilities are granted as optional items, that for institutions to take it to improve the quality of education. It is not meant to degrade the quality of education. So that is very, very important to keep in mind.
Sorry to ask one more question, madam.
Go ahead.
I also met Professor Kasturi Rangan in Bangalore, IISc, madam.
I see. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, I met him. Unfortunately, we missed you. You were not there at the time. Madam, now they have created ABCs, madam, Academic Branch of Credits.
Bank of Credits, yeah.
Yes, madam. So now this is a centralized process. If a student is doing his degree in Loyola Academy, let us say he has finished 15 credits, he has to, even this question is very important, madam. Suppose if you are not into A grade, they said that you cannot be getting into Academic Branch of Credits. And what about the rest of the colleges who have got B grade and below B grade, madam?
No. Academic Bank of Credits is not going to deny anybody or any institution.
It's, madam. It is very recently I read the news, madam. Only NAC accredited A colleges, A plus and plus can only get into Academic Branch of Credits, madam.
I don't think so, because that may be some wrong information you got. The reason I'm saying that is because the implementation plan of the policy is not yet public, you know. So it is only till now, whatever we are talking from our understanding of the NEP. So whoever said what they did, that may have been their understanding, but like the 1986 policy had a program of implementation which came out in 1992 after lots of revisions. This policy will also have a program of implementation, and the program of implementation will give you precise details of how everything will be implemented. The Academic Bank of Credits has to be centralized because it has to be tamper free. You understand? People should not be able to get in and change their grades and change their, it is also meant to halt, sort of bad behavior. So you will have to build it maybe with blockchain technologies or whatever, So it is better that the bank is built with the Government of India paying for it with very high security, because it is going to retain everybody's credit profile for a long time. But every educational institution will have access to it. Absolutely every institution will have access to it. It cannot function otherwise. How is it possible? Because I studied in Hyderabad, then I went to Bombay, now I'm in Bangalore. I should have access to my credits. It's a bit like Aadhaar, right? Somebody can check that, okay, this is your Aadhaar number. So same way, somebody can check if you fill up a form saying, I got A grade in this course in this institution, somebody should be able to check it. That's the same philosophy.
Okay, madam. The other one is, madam, no. Now we have the policy says that we have board of governors, madam.
Yes.
Every institution should we have a board of governor from the center, or should we have can we have our own board of governors, madam? Because we have governing body, the highest body for any autonomous institution. We have governing body, madam. But what
Correct.
about
That's
the
right.
function of this board of governors from the center, madam, which we don't understand?
No, no, no. I don't think the center will get in the way. So the whole idea of autonomy, when an institution becomes autonomous, it is expected to have a board of governors, right? So the same way we want as many institutions as possible to become autonomous and to have their own board of governors. Now, if government is not giving you any money, then they need not have any representative on your board. But if you are an aided institution, then you can have 1 or 2 government representatives on your board. That is fair because government is putting money into your institution. So the College of Engineering Pune, whose case study I have written, they had, because they are a government college, they had many government members on their board. But they had Dr. F.C. Kohli, chief of TCS, as the chair of their board. And he used to invite many very eminent academicians to the board meetings so that they could help design syllabus that was very high quality. So we want the board of governors to engage with the institution and contribute to improving the education. So if you have industry, like they had Atul Kirloskar from Kirloskar Industries and so on, then he will actually help set up entrepreneurship or internships or, things like that. They had Baba Kalyani from Bharat Forge. But they also had Professor B.S. Sonde from IISc Bangalore, very famous engineer, who actually helped redesign many of their courses. So the idea of a board of governors is to bring eminent people from society to help the institution raise its standards. Yeah?
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Namaste, ma'am.
Namaste. Yeah.
Good morning, fathers, and I thank all the Laila team and IQC members to give me chance to discuss with that. Ma'am, I have a question on, like, there will be for undergraduate degrees, we have multiple exit options, ma'am. Just now, sir discussed about that. So I have a query that, so if you have, as per the statement of Modi, people need to have higher qualification. And this NEP is concentrating everything on research, everything. So if we have multiple exit operation we have, there will be lacking in research areas. So what I mean to say is, so if they have, in order to say that multiple exit, if they prefer that particular years as some distance mode or online mode, so that no student will get multiple exits. Instead of that exit, they can prefer either distance mode or online mode for that 1 year. Again, they can come back and they can continue their education. This is my slight idea behind this.
So eventually you are an autonomous institution. You may be able to offer alternatives. Like I said, the multiple entry, multiple exit is a convenience to help people. Many times, somebody's father dies, there's no money anymore to pay for education. Then they have to go and work, and then they have to come back and learn. But then they have lost their 1 or 1.5 years of their BSc because nobody is going to give them credit for that. That is the situation today. Why should that happen? If they have done 1.5 years, they should be able to do another 1.5 or 2.5 years and get their degree. So this is a convenience. It's a convenience factor. Now, if you say that, okay, if you have physical class, I will charge you X amount. And if you do an online class, I will charge you for this person for whom financial situation is the problem. Then if you say that I will give them online courses at a much lower cost, at 10% of the cost, which you can do, then maybe that person can continue. But otherwise, that person is forced to exit for financial reasons. We are just enabling them to come back. And the most important beneficiaries of this multiple entry exit will be women, because women have, their childbearing age and their marriage age is all in the middle of, secondary school, high school, and masters and PhD programs, and they should not suffer. So we want the engagement of women in education and in industry, in labor force, to increase. There is a McKinsey study which says that if female participation in the labor force increases by just 10%, we will add $500 billion to the Indian economy. You know, I mean, that's a staggering amount. You see, you want women to come back in, but you know, somebody falls sick, your mother or your mother-in-law, you're forced to stay home. How do you come back? That's the aim of the multiple entry, multiple exit. It's not a general thing. It's not meant to sort of, you know, play lightly and say, okay, now I feel like studying, I don't feel like studying. Another group that will benefit from this is people who made a mistake to join some area. You know, like nowadays, engineering is so much a favorite of parents that they force their children into engineering, and the child is not interested, you know, and the child is really unhappy, but they're forced to go through the 4 years because they don't have any other choice. But we are saying you take the credits from your engineering and go and join BSc Chemical Technology if you prefer that, and just finish your course and do your studies. So people who figure out what their interest is. See, for young people, the hardest decision is, what do I want to be in life? What do I want to study? Which subject? And who do I want to become? And when that decision comes to them, they should have maximum flexibility to reach their goal. So that is another group of students who will benefit, that they will not be locked into a course for 3 years or 4 years, a course which they hate, they don't enjoy, and they want to move on. You know, today the paradigm of learning is moving into lifelong learning, that people will be learning their whole lives, because every 5 years technology changes so much that all of us have to learn our whole lives. So then in that case, you know, you should not get stuck. You should not waste 2 or 3 years of your life in an engineering course if you don't like it. So you should be able to move on.
Yes.
Those are the groups for whom this is done. Yeah.
One more question. There was a thing that, so that student can pursue their studies even in mother tongue also. So if he pursue that whole thing in mother tongue, so what will be the opportunities for him? Because he's lacking some communication skills. So what will be the opportunities for him in further?
It will come.
He's going to pursue.
It will come in time, no? I mean, we are talking about, if a student starts today, we are talking about mother tongue for early childhood learning. Yeah. Yeah, you know, we are talking about mother tongue learning for early childhood, you know, for 3 years old. By the time that student is 18, 15 years have passed. By that time, we should have been able to create opportunities for those people. You know, but NEP is saying much more than that. NEP is saying mother tongue is the best language to start learning, but children learn many languages together. So along with their mother tongue, you teach them the regional language and you teach them English, and you do all this before the child is 7 or 8 years old. The child will retain language ability their whole life. Then during their studies, if you encourage them to read and write a lot and speak a lot, you know, they should be able to communicate, speak a lot in class. You know, everything should be verbal and or written. Then that, though, you know, they will be able to function well in multiple languages. In their early childhood, they need mother tongue. Yeah. So we can create the opportunities over 5, 10, 15 years. That will happen. Yeah. Today it's not
more thing. Yes, ma'am. And even it was mentioned that higher, this foreign universities also will be established in future. And there was one thing that there is a collaboration with Indian institutions and foreign institutions.
Yes.
So which will be given importance, like, so if the foreign institutions are established here, so the people will be interested in more in foreign universities, or there will be a chance, there will be a little bit discussion. There will be a little bit.
I think that it's important for foreign universities to come and for collaborations to grow, because there should be some competition. You know, I mean, we all become lazy and you know, unwilling to work hard because the students don't have a choice. Okay. But the moment there is some competition, there'll be some level of energy and innovation and so on going on. In any case, the foreign universities is very restricted. It's only the top 100 or something like that. You know, we have done. We have not, see, because the Indian education system is not ready to compete with the foreign universities, because we are still very constrained. There's not enough autonomy. There's not enough funding. So we are not in a position to compete with them. This is why we have not allowed most foreign universities to come. But over time, we should become more competitive, and we should compete with foreign universities on their own terms by the quality of the education that we provide, you know. And there is no such thing as preference, because education is being done by both public and private providers. So it is up to the institutions to make their own arrangements. One of the things with all these kind of opportunities is that they're all very expensive. So they're not accessible for many children from limited financial backgrounds, you see. So there is an issue there also. Yeah.
One more thing, ma'am, shall I ask? Shall I? Yeah, there
I
is,
don't know, maybe we should give some others a chance so that then we can come back again. Is that
Yes,
okay?
ma'am.
I see Dr.
Yes,
Sonika Sharma with her hand raised. Maybe she can.
Okay, ma'am, thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you, ma'am.
yeah. You come back when after one
Yes,
round is
ma'am.
over, okay?
Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Sonika Sharma. Your hand is raised.
Yeah. I have to be unmuted.
Okay, yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon, and
afternoon.
it's a pleasure to hear from you, Madam Lina. And we are very fortunate and thankful to our IQSC and the management members for this wonderful session. Ma'am, my question is actually, after reading all the NEP, now the next question is how to move from here. You know, the biggest thing is, you know, what we should focus on, how should we decide what kind of our college, you know, should aim at it. Like, you know, does it fit more into autonomous granting? Shall we, you know, focus on more on research and make it like a, you know, research, less of research, but more of teaching intensive. So in that case, what I find is, which is not very clear always, is a problem with our research. You know, last year, or even with many other faculties, we have tried to apply for the funding. But as you say, you know, that you write a very good proposal and then you get a grant. But, you know, to write a grant, we need to do something. There is not a reasonable work we have. We do. Last time I myself applied for DST project under TIER fellowship, you know, with the teaching and a collaboration with IITs. But it was not sanctioned. So that was quite disheartening. And, you know, like I had a good kind of publications things, and I'm also a PhD from STU. And actually a ETH Zurich postdoc. So I had a good career, and after coming to the college, you know, some little publication continued, not much. So that was quite disheartening. So now if you are saying that this February, we are given, our finance minister has given such a big funding. So how do we apply, and you know, under what category? Because it's so confusing. DBT or this DST, UGC is closed as of now for minor and major from last few years. So that is one thing. And I even tried to, as you were saying, that under NEP, people, I mean, the policy is encouraging us to collaborate with research institutes. You know, that was exactly my thing when I was trying to make an MOU with IIT Hyderabad. I thought, like a college, when we adopt a college or a school, you know, for extension activity, why not in a research institute should adopt our college like this, so that, you know, we are given that same kind of, you know, social extension in the research. But, you know, when I met their deans in other institutes, IIT and HCU, you know, they are not really interested. They are interested in making an MOU with foreign universities. So, you know,
so Sonika,
that's
your
where we were
point,
lacking.
no, your points are very well made, and that is exactly the reason why in the NEP there is the discussion of NRF. If you have read the NEP, you would have seen that the NRF focuses a lot on mentoring faculty in universities and colleges. The mentoring aspect is very heavily focused on. And it's exactly like you said, today, if you go to IIT Hyderabad or and ask them, they are not interested because they don't get any credit for it. There's no incentive for them to help you. Okay.
Exactly.
But what we are doing is we are creating the incentive to help you. We are saying that retired professors can get NRF professorships. You know, they can get salaries to actually station themselves at your college or collaborate with you from where they are apply with a joint proposal, because even writing a proposal needs some skills. So they who have already done a lot of research and done a lot of research proposals are familiar with those skills, and you are not. So we will have this opportunity, you will have this opportunity to have mentors from nearby institutions, and they will be paid by NRF to mentor you. So we are creating a powerful incentive for research institutions to mentor colleges, faculty in colleges who are keen on doing research. Research is something that people should have a passion to do. So some faculty members will like to do research. Some faculty members are not interested in research, they want to do teaching. That is wonderful, they should continue to do that. There are some faculty members who are very good with administration, they should help with administration, but they should not be hurt during their promotion because they haven't published any paper or they haven't done enough teaching. Similarly, like I said, in College of Engineering, Pune, they have 65 clubs. These clubs cannot run without faculty looking after them. So faculty look after those clubs. Teachers, those faculty have to get credit for their time, you know. So both the incentive and the credit system has to change in your own institution and in the research institution, so that there is enough sufficient mentoring available. So NRF will actually gather together mentors, and when you say, I want to apply and I need some help, we will assign a mentor. The NRF will assign a mentor to you and help you to do research, because the whole idea is to seed research in places where not enough research is happening, which means you need some hand-holding, and that hand-holding will be provided proactively by the NRF. Okay, so it will change. Yeah.
So what you mean, ma'am, is like this policy has been rolled out to the institutes, research institutes, so that if now we go to them and we can ask for
correct,
such
but
kind of
it has not yet started. I just want to say that the implementation plan should be out in a month or two, because the Prime Minister last month said that please hurry up, because we cannot afford to delay implementation of NRF. So you have to watch, you have to read, watch the news. Education Minister tweets a lot. If the implementation plan is out, he will tell you, or otherwise you will watch it in the newspapers and so on. But follow the news, because the time has come for the implementation to begin, and it will begin in April, I'm sure of it.
This will be very useful, ma'am, not only at a PG or research level, because when we are making our undergraduate courses 4 years, the 4th year will be
correct,
mostly the research oriented. So if teachers here can help the students, make a collaboration and with others, that will help here also.
A lot.
Yeah. Ma'am, second question is like in this autonomous granting, degree granting colleges, PG courses will be like given equal
allowed.
No?
Yes,
Not
yes,
that,
of course.
yeah.
No, yeah, they will be allowed, of course, of course. You can even start a PhD program. Suppose you have a big faculty in one department. You don't have to start a PhD program in all departments, but if you have, say, 6, 7, 8 faculty members in one big department, because one department is very successful, you can start a PhD program there. There are no constraints. Right.
And other thing is, ma'am, regarding this, flexibility of the students to take courses, especially in terms of, online courses using MOOCs. Colleges like us, which are not affiliated, which are not engineering colleges, the university, our university, Usmania University, and many other universities have not rolled their rules for application of credit transfer, which becomes a very big problem, for us to implement.
Now all that will change with the implementation of the policy. So all these constraints, the policy was aware of all these problems, and that is why we have relaxed them. But the governments, so Ministry of Education and the Department of Higher Education in your state have to implement it. Then only the provisions of the policy will become available to you. So that is the only delay at the moment. But hopefully it will not delay too much, because the Prime Minister has been categorical in saying that implement the NEP fast. So hopefully that will come.
Yeah, so I think that will help us to, know from the state government or the center government, what are the, in the roadmap, what we should focus first, and, how we should plan here.
Correct.
All the
but there are many things, because you are autonomous, there are many things you can already do. Like you can give students choice across humanities and social science and sciences. You can give them that. You don't have to put them, you don't have to give PCM as a grouping. You can give them, you can introduce the major and the minor concept and say that, you know, your major, you will focus on physics, but if you do physics, then you have to do mathematics, but you don't necessarily need to do chemistry. You can do a sociology, or you can do history, or you can do, you know, economics or something, you know. So those kinds of facilities for students, you can start today because you are an autonomous institution. That's what I want to encourage you to do, that don't wait for the law. Your autonomy gives you a lot of freedom. Start using it. It's very, very important. Start using it, start talking about it, become resource persons for other colleges. And, you know, sort of, we want every layer to be resource persons to the layers below them, so that the whole system rises in quality. So I would encourage you all to do that. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else who has a question? Otherwise, maybe Rupa can come back, maybe.
Yes, ma'am, shall I?
Yeah, go ahead. I didn't see any other question. Yeah.
Okay,
Ma'am,
ma'am.
I'm Dr. Ratnavani, ma'am.
Go ahead. Yeah,
So
sorry.
from social sciences.
Yeah.
So just because you mentioned social sciences right now, I just want, it's not a question, ma'am. I just want to ask you, can you throw little light upon these social sciences in NEP, how the policy makers have included to include these social sciences in the curriculum in the coming years and all, because our country completely dominated with sciences and all. So how you people like policy makers, no, it's not like father.
North, no, see south and north, no, completely they are offering so.
No, it's not like.
So yes, it is. Yeah. So I think that both things are true. We do have an emphasis on STEM, but amazingly enough, we don't have enough STEM in the country. We don't have enough anything. Okay. Now, if you see anything good, meaning good STEM education, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and good social sciences education, we don't have enough of either. There are lots of clauses floating around, but there is no commitment to excellence and high quality courses, you see, because one of the things that one has to understand about humanities and social sciences is that there is a lot that is not known. There is a lot of field research needs to be done, lots of understanding. You have guidelines, but you know, there is no gospel truth, let me say that, you know, about many subjects. And students have to understand this, and they have to understand that, you know, you have to discuss, and you have to you know, research, and you have to agree to disagree. And you know, so social sciences and humanities are more controversial in that sense, you know, because you know, nobody seems to agree on what needs to be taught and so on. But the autonomy of an institution will help you as a faculty member, for you to have complete control over what you teach and how you evaluate the students, and what curriculum, pedagogy, and evaluation. That is when you're in charge of the course. But then if you get that freedom, then it becomes your responsibility to make sure that you give a holistic picture to the student, and not give them so it's a both sides. When both sides collaborate, then the student benefits and society benefits. So the NEP has tried to emphasize autonomy for this reason. And the managements need to protect the autonomy of faculty, and to say that classrooms are safe spaces where you can discuss any topic under the sun, because students are waking up and they are getting exposed to many contrarian views, and they don't know what to think, how to think. So how to learn, you have to teach them how to learn, you know, and so that they can become independent self-learners, and they can change their minds if necessary. They start from one viewpoint and they change to another viewpoint. That's our job as faculty members. So so the challenge in social sciences and humanities is much higher, I think. But many excellent examples exist, including, I'm sure, at your place. So therefore, we are hoping that there will be enough, you know, information exchange, knowledge exchange between institutions. And then, so one of the things that is not discussed very often is to form communities of practice. Like teachers should form groups of teachers who teach the same subject and discuss with each other, you know. this kind of thing is there in most professions, like the legal professionals, they have the Bar Council of India. Practicing lawyers have the Bar Council of India. Practicing doctors have Medical Council of India. You know, we don't, there is nothing equivalent of that in education. Okay, of course, you cannot have just a Teachers Council of India because different teachers are teaching different subjects. So, you know, maybe we can have an umbrella Teacher Council of India where, you know, sort of general aspects of being faculty members are discussed. But then beneath that, we'll need subject teacher communities of practice. You can look it up. It is professional learning communities, they are called. Where teachers of different subjects get together and discuss how to teach their subject and exchange ideas, and that helps each other. So you get help not just from you know, you're a social science professor in India, in Mumbai, but you can get help from a social science professor in Australia or Argentina, for that matter. You know, so that is very, very important, that we exchange information among our peers. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Madam, can I ask a question? Can you see me? Yes, yes, yes. You can ask. You can ask. Madam.
Is someone asking a question? I can't hear.
Yes.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
This is Dr. Krishna Mohan.
Yes.
I belong to Department of Agriculture Science.
Right.
So this is related to agriculture education, madam. There are two streams of agriculture education offered in our country. One is under agriculture university setup. The other one is under UGC universities, but offering agriculture education.
Correct.
And we are following this ICAR syllabus we are following.
Correct.
This
Correct.
4 years honors BSc agriculture.
Correct.
And though we are UGC accredited, these courses, and when the students are going for higher education or for government jobs, they are asking it should be accredited by ICAR, Indian Council of Agriculture Research.
Right.
Is there any uniformity in the new education policy for accreditation for agriculture education, or it should be strictly accredited by ICAR?
No, no. So
Or
all
is there
those
any
will
provision?
change.
Or is there any provision or changes made in new education policy? Otherwise, the students are facing a lot of difficulties for going for higher education and also getting eligibility for government jobs. Can you throw some light on this, ma'am?
No, so the details of this, these are very good questions, and it's very, very important. The policy has given a guideline that all these issues should be sorted out when in the new regulatory architecture that is going to come. UGC is going to be dissolved, and there is going to be a new body called the Higher Education Commission of India, and under which there will be 4 autonomous verticals. One will be the regulatory authority, National Higher Education Regulatory Council. Then there'll be a accreditation council. NAC will reform into the new accreditation council, but NAC will actually sort of become a super accreditor, and many other new institutions will be invited to become accreditors. So that every institution can be accredited once in 5 years. So the accreditation capacity will be increased a lot. So, you know, all the 4 verticals, you know, funding, accreditation, regulation, policy making will all come under the new umbrella regulator. And at that time, a new higher education qualification framework will be made, and all the professional bodies like the ICAR and the Bar Council and the Pharmacy Council and the Nursing Council and all the other, you know, there are some 19 councils, Council of Architecture, they will all come together under the General Education Council, in which they will all give inputs, but a coherent set of regulation and a framework will come out so that students don't have to suffer like this for jobs. This is the job of the new what we call HECI, Higher Education Commission of India. I think the bill is ready. It should come out in public domain for consultation, and then it will go to Parliament for ratification, and then it will get implemented. So new regulatory architecture will come, which is much lighter regulation. It will not micromanage. Therefore, like I was answering to Father's question, that it will not micromanage, it will give you lots of freedom, but then it doesn't want you to abuse that freedom. So you have to say on your website what you do, how you do, and then you have to follow that. So you have to follow your own blueprint of what you said you will do.
Madam, one more. Thank you, ma'am.
Good point. Yeah.
This is Father Joji.
Yes.
Madam, we have an intermediate campus, madam, what you call +2.
Yes.
And intermediate has to be attached with school education.
Yes.
And no, we don't have in and around school. Should this intermediate should be attached to the school, or can we run from here? We have 10 kilometers vicinity, we have another school, madam. So can we run the intermediate from the same campus?
So I don't know. So these are details which governments must decide. But I think what will most likely happen is, because we need additional secondary school capacity. So like I said, that, if 100 children start, only 56 are coming. So there is only capacity for 56. But if we want 100 children to come, then what should happen is that PU colleges could be allowed to start 9 and 10. So that secondary school is one bundle. So you can have 9, 10, 11, 12 in one space. And then if you have 9 and 10 in another school, you can start 11 and 12 there too. So then you increase the capacity for 11 and 12. That is most likely what will happen, but it is really in the hand. These are details that are in the hands of government. It does not specify by policy.
Thank you, ma'am.
Madam.
Yes.
Madam, it's so nice to have you.
You can ask.
Yeah.
Madam, it is so nice to have you here, madam. I am Ghosh, physics lecturer here, madam. I am a condensed matter physicist.
Right.
Actually,
the question is about research, madam.
Your voice has gone very soft. I'm sorry. The volume disappeared. Can you please increase your volume? I can hear that you are speaking, but I can't hear your words.
Can you hear now, madam?
No, I can't hear you. The volume just disappeared. First there was a.
Hello, can you hear, madam, now?
Yes, now I can hear you. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Anyhow, madam, first of all, very nice to have you here, madam. I'm a physics lecturer here. I have done my condensed matter physics from Pondy University.
Right.
And way back in 1994, myself and my classmate Rajesh Raghavan, we came to IISc Bangalore. And Rajesh Raghavan, we both cleared entrance, madam. Rajesh Raghavan joined for research. 3 years he has done there, and then 2 years in Max Planck Institute.
Yeah.
And somebody told me 7-8 years it takes, so I came back to Hyderabad and joined IISc for research.
Right.
So nice to have you here, madam. So I have reached up to MPhil, madam.
Right.
So it is a question on research. Somewhere in once this national education policy comes into force, somewhere I have read it, madam. These doctoral candidates, whoever will be doing the PhD now, doctoral candidates have to learn an Indian language. A doctoral study should not be intensive and focus on a topic of study. A doctoral study should be intensive and focus on the topic of study, and learning new language should not be a part of the PhD. That is one thing. And what are the fields of national importance that on the topic on which we are doing PhD? This is a major, I think, one drawback in this new policy. No government should give given the authority to decide on what topics of research one should do. It is always effort should be made to study and understand every phenomena that manifest themselves around us. That's the field which we are doing research. Academic freedom should not be compromised at any level, madam.
Yeah,
so the topic of research also should be governed by that council. Is it true, madam?
No, not at all. At least, see, I can only speak from the perspective
of written in the new education policy, madam.
So I don't know where it's written. If you share with me, I can tell you whether it is right or wrong, but people are writing all kinds of things. But like I said, the implementation plan has to come, and the implementation plan will contain many details. One of the things that the NRF will do to encourage research is to encourage existing faculty members in colleges, people like yourself, to complete a PhD if you would like it, you know.
Yeah,
And for that, they will match you up with a mentor, because you are a condensed matter physicist. There is a lot of condensed matter in TIFR Hyderabad. There is condensed matter in University of Hyderabad. And there is condensed matter in many places. So you can match up with somebody and you can register for a PhD, because if a faculty member gets a PhD, there is an enormous multiplicative effect on their students, right? Many more students will learn how to do research. So the focus on PhDs among faculty members is going to be very high in NRF. And absolutely not, there will be no force on people to choose only this subject or that subject. Absolutely not. Of course, by funding, through funding, one can channel money into new and important areas. For example, you know, because there is a lot of vocational education going to be integrated, how do there could be some research that is necessary to see whether these things are leading to fruition. So maybe some money will be there for that, or you know, some money could be there for research in AI and data sciences and blockchain and so on, because those are new areas. So
what about nano fields, madam? Nanotechnology, quantum dots?
Lots of money is there already, but much more will come. Much more money will come in nanosciences and so on. Engineering fields with applied future, because we want to become part of the knowledge economy. If we want to become a richer country, we have to use education and research to generate products and services which are internationally competitive. That is the aim of research. So all
what
these
about language, madam? Other than our mother tongue, we have to know to speak other language. Is it compulsory in research now, madam?
No, it was for young people. It is for 3-year-olds to start. It's for existing people. How you can enforce? You know, if you know a language, you know a language, and Indians mostly have exposure to multiple languages, so they have language ability. But that doesn't mean that you can do a research in a foreign language. You're going to focus on your research, or you're focusing on your language studies. No, they won't do things like that. There is.
Kindly you discourage it, madam. If by chance this particular clause is there somewhere hidden in this NEP,
no. You have not read
to Government of India, not to.
No, you have not read the policy document. See, the policy and its implementation are different things. So the implementation will come down to the state level, and it depends on the state governments what they decide to do. So these things are very, very important. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Namaste, ma'am. Namaste, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yeah, go ahead. Is that you, Rupa?
Yeah.
Someone else?
Yeah, someone else. Ma'am will talk after that. I'll do.
Okay.
Madam, good afternoon. I am Dr. Rama.
Yes.
Madam,
Hi.
I have 2 questions here.
Yeah.
Suppose assume that a student has done BTech mechanical for 2 years.
Yeah.
Later, he thought that this is not my cup of tea, and he went to hotel management.
Right.
Now, after he finishes these 2, where will he land up in getting a job?
So that is up to the type of courses that he took, right? So if he didn't do enough courses in engineering to get a job related to his engineering field, that is a much more demanding thing. So he may not be able to do it. So what we'll have to do is that after getting a degree in hotel management, if he doesn't have enough knowledge of hotel management, he'll have to do a further 1 year or something specialization in hotel management before he can get a job. But these are for actually us faculty members to figure it out, Rama. You know, it is for us to figure out how majors, minors, how many credits in your subject, what prerequisites, what minimum knowledge you can have to see if he gets a hotel management major, you know, then that is what that means is that there is enough hotel management credits for him to get a job in hotel management. If he has not completed the basic requirement for a hotel management major, then he will have to do additional courses. Maybe he can stay an extra semester or 2 semesters and do additional courses and complete the major. Then he is eligible for job in hotel management. You understand?
And
What
one more thing
it is for us academics to actually decide when a person has enough knowledge in a particular field. So it's our challenge. It's our challenge.
the college also will be losing the revenue for the next 2 years because he's
You can
dropping out
admit-
in between.
You can admit another student, no? At that time, you can admit another
in
student.
between, we have to
There'll be-
give an
yes.
entry after 2 years.
Yes, there can be lots of flexibility like that. Students will fluidly come and go, but I think the most important thing to know is that today our GER is only 26. Out of every 100 students who start in school, only 26 are getting higher education. We want that number to go to 50. With 26, we already have 36 million students in the system. So if the GER has to double, we are going to reach 70 million students. So there's enough students for you all to get more admissions in. So these things are not worries. You will have to become,
One more
that's
thing
why I
is-
said the challenge is for us to become more flexible and input
Okay.
students. Yeah.
Then suppose if the student is doing major as physics and mathematics,
Mhm.
and if he is going for, instead of chemistry, he is going for social sciences.
Correct.
So what will happen to these lecturers, ma'am, chemistry lecturers?
Every student will not do that. No, there'll be students majoring in chemistry, right? There will be students
three
majoring
main
in chemistry,
skills.
and there'll be students majoring in chemical technology. So the faculty will also become more flexible. They will not be tied to rigid department boundaries. So if there is some engineering department that needs a basic chemistry course, then the chemistry lecturer from the science department can teach that course. So there will be lots of flexibility of usage of faculty also, you know. And what we are saying is that the way to become efficient with faculty resources is to increase student enrollment. So start with I don't know if you're already 3,000, but if you're not 3,000, please reach 3,000. Then try to go to 5,000, 10,000 students. Then the faculty, every faculty will have a full quota of work. So that can be worked out. So these are the ambitions that the NEP has. So for all
Thank
of
you,
us to grow together in high quality. Okay, thank you.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah, so Rupa, shall we make this the last
Yeah.
question then?
Yes,
yeah,
ma'am.
go ahead.
Ma'am,
Yeah, tell
ma'am,
me.
it was mentioned that there is a gender balance in admission to higher education institutions, ma'am. So at what is it mentioned? Any percentage of any percentage if he has to maintain gender balance? Any percentage of reservation given to girl students, ma'am?
No, I don't think there is specific reservation for girl students, but I don't know that. See, I'm not aware because there are too many institutions, so I can't say. But the problem is that we have at the moment in today's time we have equal number of boys and girls in the higher education system, but in the labor force we have only 26% women. So what's
Yes, ma'am.
happening to these girls? Where are they going actually? Why are they not coming into the workforce? That is
Yes, ma'am.
something that we need to look at. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. One more question, one last question. So we have like B.Ed course, 4-year course is there, 2 years course is there. So if a student is completing 4-year degree, then he's going to do 2 years course only. But total he's covering 6 years. So
Right.
that will be a lengthy for him. So in order to take 2 years course, we can just put 4-year course, no ma'am. Why this 2-year B.Ed course is there?
No. So the B.Ed course, there have to be different length B.Ed courses. So there's a 4-year course for people after 12th standard. There can be a 2-year course for somebody who has finished a 3-year BSc and decides, oh, now I want to be a teacher and I want to teach physics. So if you have already studied BSc physics, then you need to study curriculum, pedagogy, assessment, all those stuff in B.Ed. So you can do a 2-year course. But there can be very high-level professionals who have done their PhD, but who need, or engineers who have done engineering BSc masters and who want to come in as expert resources for vocational or professional education, they will need some orientation towards education, how to manage adolescents in class and so on. So for them, it can be a half a year or a 1 year course. So there'll be many different types of faculty education, but the 4-year B.Ed will become the base degree for school teachers. So after 12th standard, you do 4-year degree and you become a school teacher. If you have done a BSc and you want to become a subject teacher, then you can do maybe a 1-year B.Ed or a 2-year B.Ed. That is up to you. So those flexibilities will become available, that you know, who will do what. But it will not be so rigid anymore that, you know, anybody can decide. So many people who work in industry for 10 years, 15 years, they work in companies. I worked in industry. Then they say, I want to go and teach now. So what do they have? They have engineering degree. They have a lot of corporate experience, but they have no experience managing a class, you know, so they need some training also. So all those kinds of trainings will become available from departments of education in universities and colleges. So if your college has a department of education, then you can start planning those kinds of degrees.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for having this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Jagadish, madam.
Yeah.
It's actually a non-academic question. We have some sections of people have a fear that they are having some reservations and all, they may lose slowly because of this new policy. And some others also having some teacher recruitment. We don't have any regulation on that. Most of the institutes are private. So when private teachers are recruited, when there's no proper regulation because they are private, will it affect and lead to slowly towards the privatization of education? It's my question. We have some fears from different sections of people. Just I want to put it and know from.
No. I think, see, higher education is private today, okay? 78% of the institutions are private. 78%, okay? 69% of the enrollment is private. So higher education is already private, all right? The problem is that there are too many unethical private institutions, and the NEP is going to try to weed them out, especially the B.Ed colleges. Every other day in my office, somebody will get a call saying, do you want a B.Ed degree? 2 lakh rupees, okay? That has to shut down. But private colleges that are doing good work should be encouraged, but private colleges that are doing bad work should be shut down. That is a consensus across, because we are doing a very poor service to our society and to our students and our faculty by letting these colleges survive. So we have to shut them down. So, yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Shall we close then?
Thank you very much, madam.
Thank you.
On behalf of my esteemed management, from my bottom of my heart, I thank Leena madam for clearing all our clouds which were persisting towards NEP. You have cleaned everything. We are very thankful to you, madam. So whenever you come to Hyderabad, just take your phone call, madam. We will be happy to you in our campus, so that you can also see how we are functioning, madam. Thank you very much for everything, madam.
Yeah.
So you have obliged us,
for
given approximately 1.5 hour time. Thank you for this. Thank you very much.
No, you're very welcome. You're very, very welcome. I'm very happy to be here. You are an autonomous college. You can do a lot. I encourage you to do a lot, and you know, take your place, grow, and you know, mentor other institutions and so on, and share the spirit of the NEP with other people. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Last point, madam. You know, man is born free, but always is found in chains.
Yeah.
See, autonomous colleges, they cannot come out from the clutches of universities.
No, that will change now. That will change now.
Please, madam, because when we want to think innovatively and implement something, no, the hindrance will come.
Correct. That will change now. It will change now. We are working very hard to convince governments to do that, and they should. I'll tell you where the problem comes. The problem is coming because there are too many unethical private players, and they are, you know, they have eroded the trust in the system. So governments are not happy to open up, but we are working on them, saying that, you know, the autonomous colleges are our best bet, please leave them completely free. So hopefully that will happen. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, madam. Happy to listen to you. Thanks. God bless you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Georgie. Thank you, Rupa. Everyone.
Thank you, ma'am.
Everyone. Thank you all. Yeah. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.